Good evening, and thank you for remaining with us as we discuss the film Sankofa. My name is Kashana Soldier, and I am a history faculty here at Sarah Lawrence College. Tonight, I am joined by an amazing panel of Sarah Lawrence alum, filmmakers, visual artists, educators, and writers. Embracing the call to action of the Belonging series, this conversation will explore the link between the legacy of slavery and modern societal problems, resistance and liberation, as well as generational storytelling. After introducing our panelists, the conversation will address themes from the movie as well as intersections of identity and community building. It is my honor to introduce Oceana James. She is a St. Croix interdisciplinary artist. Her work is an examination, a retelling, and a reimagining of her Caribbean identity and a commentary on the socio-political, cultural, and economic realities of people of African descent. James experiments with the use of time, space, nonlinear form, and movement. Her current research focuses on the intersection of science, spirituality, and the body to embody and exercise the traumas of colonialism. Next, I'm joined by Damani Baker. Baker is a filmmaker and educator. As a director, his work spans museum exhibits, feature documentaries, music videos, and advertising. Baker's films explore narratives of migration as well as understanding of the human story and its connection to place. Professor Baker is also a faculty member here at Sarah Lawrence College, where he teaches filmmaking to a diverse group of creators, ensuring that the stories of all communities continue to be told with grace, dignity, and power. And finally, Hasna Mohammed is a visual artist, writer, and educator whose work focuses on family, social justice, education, and the human condition. Mohammed is also an activist and founder of Education as Justice, an organization that seeks to elevate and amplify education on social justice platforms. Her photography work has been exhibited in various cities in the United States, and her work has been published in a number of magazines. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Haile Gerima's Sankofa was a groundbreaking film, not only in terms of his cinematography, but also his portrayal of resistance and community building. Damani, I'd love to begin this conversation with Mr. Gerima's impact on the visual arts at the time of the film's release up into the present.
Wow. First, it's really wonderful to be here. This is such a full circle experience. Um, you know, Truthfully, to put Mr. Garima's work into this one moment is quite a daunting task. So I'll speak from the heart because I try to lead with story and the personal. Um, this work is a testament to what is possible in cinema. Um, I first saw this film actually as a student undergrad at Sarah Lawrence in 1993 when the Black Student Union Harambe and I organized a van trip to Brooklyn to a theater to see a film called Sankofa. And I did not know the work. I did not know very much about the filmmaker. And as you could imagine, my very young and excited mind was completely blown. And Haile Gerima was there to do a talkback and Q&A after the film. And I can easily say without a doubt that this film and that experience shaped so much of how I imagined telling stories myself. So when this film was released, the model of taking a film on your own and self-distributing, um, as a filmmaker, I can't explain, I can't find the words to actually explain what it takes to get your film in front of an audience. The incredible amount of labor beyond the actual production and shooting and raising the funds and working with a crew and um, putting something out that you believe in to an audience at a time where those channels were just not open or available in traditional cinema theaters and distribution. So to see it now being reintroduced to another generation, a beautiful 4K restored print by Array, which is also my distribution home for the house on Coca Road, it's just really a phenomenal moment. This film left a, a mark on me in terms of not just the ability to tell stories, but just the subject matter. That there was space and room, and there were others who were brave enough to put images on the screen that challenged us and took us to places that we maybe had not seen before. In this way, with the levels of experimentation, with a sonic experience of this nature. So this film is huge to me. It is, I think, after watching the 4K print again recently, it stands up, it holds up, it is as absolutely as relevant as it was then to the 18-year-old Damani, and really excited about being in Brooklyn for the first time, to now in my own career. So it's a huge moment. He has been an inspiration for many years in my own, from the LA Rebellion at UCLA up to now, which I'm happy to speak about more later.
Hasna, I know that we talked previously about the impact of, to Damani's point, right, support for filmmakers. I'd love to sort of talk about your connection to the film, not only sort of with support in mind, but also how it's impacted you seeing it um, after it was released, even though you were no longer at Sarah Lawrence, to Damani's point when it was released. We can't hear you. You're on mute, I believe.
Somebody had to do that, right? So it's done. We did it. First of all, I'm so excited to be connected again with Sarah Lawrence. I am an alum from many decades ago, and I'm so pleased to see you all here connected with Sarah Lawrence, and that you would invite me. I'm very pleased to be connected. Um, the 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 connectivity. I did not see the film in 1993. And I saw it just recently in preparation for this conversation. And what I do know is that my father and mother, Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee, they had done some filming in Nigeria in the 70s. And when they did that, they had a great deal of difficulty. There was unrest in Nigeria right before one of the films started shooting, and there were uh, hangings and all kinds of wild things going on. But their fight at that time, back in the 70s, was to do something independent of Hollywood, and it was a very, very big struggle. And the films, according to my dad, he felt that they were not as successful as they could have been because of the way the stories were, the interpretation that was given to the stories, that was expected from the stories. And so to see it now, I'm so that while it was 93, even 20 years after the films that my parents did, the stories still hold up, and they are part of a continuum of storytelling that we must also continue. I want to just take us back just for a second, and I'm hoping I'm answering your question. If not, it's just something I'd like to say anyway. It's a continuation. It's a mark on a timeline. Sankofa is, and I was born in 1915, and that same um, question, what to do with the Black folk. They are um, they are bringing the fear of Black folk, and the fear that Black folk would be unaccountable and not contribute. We move up through the stages in the stories. You think of Roots, you think of even Let's Do the Right Thing, uh, and then all before Sankofa. And they each in that story, in the story of the unjust enslavement of African people, and the traumatic reverberation throughout history that continues until now. So I hope I'm hitting your question. It was difficult to tell this story from in Africa by an African American decades ago. That an African was able to tell this story successfully in the 90s is marvelous. It is an advancement for sure, and it adds to the nuance of the storytelling process. And we as storytellers need to continue to have our authentic voices and to bring in all levels of voices in order to continue to tell the story.
Absolutely. I do want to sort of bring something up that you said. You used the word traumatic, but you also sort of talked about a continuum of experience. So I'd like to pose this question to Oceana. Since the release of Sankofa in 1993, there's been an increasing focus by not only scholars, but film critics and audiences on trauma, right? And this sort of psychological and emotional impact being portrayed on films. And there's sort of no way to say this politically correct, but there are some very difficult scenes to watch in the film. And the situations that the director and writer choose to depict revealed to the viewer sort of this ethos about how do you sort of deal with the friction between morality and individual as well as collective action. So, in your words, Oceana, how does the brutality of slavery depicted in the film come into conversation with the resistance portrayed by characters like Shola and Shengo and Nunu?
Thank you for that question. I think so. I don't. Part of the problem right now, I think, is that we don't see a balance between this display of the brutality done on the Black body and the resistance. So for me, Sankofa, this movie, was about the resistance. It wasn't about the brutality, and that's the marked difference. And so it was about the resistance, the actual rebellion that they were planning, the resistance in their actual Sankofa fetching, that be it the herbalism, be it the storytelling, be it the actual practice of African-based spirituality. Those were the different types of resistance that we had to employ. And so, yes, the brutality was there, and yes, slavery and the hundreds of years of enslavement and oppression and the systemic and systematic ways that colonizers used to destroy us, talk about not politically correct, but used to destroy us. Those things, yes, happened. And the film, in a way that was not distasteful, but was matter of fact, this is what happened. There's no going around it. But what I do think is that we kind of now see that some films are just focusing, and some artists are focusing just mainly on the brutality and the exploitation and the abuse, and but we don't see this telling of the story from a point of resistance. And for me, that's the difference with Sankofa and the necessary what's necessary in the art form, or what's necessary in the storytelling. I think too that, as for me, well, let me speak for myself. As an artist, it is important for me to have that balance, because we won't be here. None of us would be here if it wasn't for those who survived and those who did resist and those who did fight. And I come from a place personally that there were many, many, many rebellions in the Virgin Islands where I'm from, and where my family is from. We could talk about the rebellion in St. John in 1733, when the enslaved took over the island for 9 months. We can talk about the rebellion in St. Croix in 1848 that led to our emancipation. We can talk about the fire burn in 1878 that happened 30 years after there was workers' revolution, women-led workers' revolution. Let me clarify that. So resistance really is just in my DNA. And I think that's a defining. Let me just to wrap up and repeat what I said. I think the defining thing, or the necessary thing, is the focus on resistance as opposed to the focus on those traumas. We're telling the same story, but the perspective is different. And that makes a difference on how it's told and how it's received.
Absolutely. So building on that, Damani, as a director and as a filmmaker, how do you portray narratives of resistance in your own work, but also how are you impacted by what Sankofa presented? Damani, your microphone is muted.
So I knew there would be one more person. Thank you for that question. I mean, the resistance, I think in every choice I make as a filmmaker, whether I'm aware of it or not, I think is born in that conversation, in that narrative, on a very basic level, from the simple fact that the stories I understood had value I didn't see around me. When you go out to the traditional cinema, or what you're actually consuming growing up. And then you realize the narratives that don't exist out there live in your own backyard, in your homes, and the interaction with family, and the interaction with elders, with the interactions with spirit. All of these things that I think the English language has been slow to catch up on exist in our tradition. And so I think my appreciation for filmmaking and the decisions I make as a director are really born out of an oral tradition that has been generational. So yes, the tools and the equipment are the way that I think, it's wonderful that Netflix exists to present it to a larger audience, but those stories existed long before that. And so the significance of Sankofa, just going back a bit, the fact that, Haile Gerima took this film under his arm and went, city to city, presenting it to community, and the fact that Harambe at Sarah Lawrence knew about that, and that those connections were happening without the infrastructure. But the infrastructure that I think matters, and the infrastructure that people tend to discount, is something that is so rooted in a culture, so rooted in our way of speaking, so rooted in how we reach each other through language, through song, through community, it's so powerful. And so to see that film that year as part of a legacy of not only Haile Gerima, but Julie Dash, Larry Clark, Billy Woodbury, an incredible camp of filmmakers that were at UCLA in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s that really were laying a blueprint on getting films done, and including the community, about the community, starring the community, and doing it, out the trunk. I mean, there was something with Still Bill, the first documentary feature I released on Bill Withers, when we were trying to reach an audience with this film about Bill Withers. Before we had a large distribution deal, we gave the film away for free. This was back when CDs, DVDs existed. And if anyone wanted to screen the film, you could have a copy of the film. And in exchange for that DVD, you would tell us about how you screened it. So there were Thanksgiving dinners where families sat around and watched it. There were backyard screenings in Brooklyn. There were all over the country, building an audience on our own. And the film eventually landed where it needed to be. But I think that is just kind of born out of kind of this idea that narrative shifting is part of paradigm shifting. And if you work in an industry like mine, I don't know how to do it any other way. And so it's not a coincidence that Array is my distribution home, and the model that is community-based, and they released The House on Cocoa Road in a very similar way, where there was talkbacks and there's people around the country having conversation about the film and the subject matter. So that it's built into the work. It's built into my classroom with students. They think they're showing up for a filmmaking class, and then within the first minute and a half, we're actually talking about what it means to be a human being that values other human beings, and pressing the button is the easy part.
So I would love to sort of continue what you're saying about the process of filmmaking, but also the stories that are told with filmmaking. And this question is for you, Hasna. In recent years, there's been sort of this flurry of films about slavery, from 12 Years a Slave to Antebellum that came out last year. And this has been met with sort of varying levels of acceptance, but also disdain, right? And what's, I think, most impactful about Sankofa is it embodies this idea of going back to the past to learn to make a better future. And the film was at that time and still remains a voice of criticism to society and a reminder to go back and remember the past, but also an important part of dealing with our present and future realities. So as a activist and educator, do you see any connection between the legacy and impact of slavery and current societal issues? We have to have you
Wait,
unmute again.
wait, wait. Absolutely. I do see the correlation, and it can connect what I was saying before relative not only to the trauma, because Ms. James was absolutely right. It's about resistance, and that's what we saw in the year of 2020, a resurgence of that resistance. I recognized a lot of the themes throughout the film can be brought throughout um, current time. You have the film opens up with the bronze statue of the mother and the child, and it has a very significant image of Christ being crucified on the cross, the bronze image at the end, close to the end. And it resonates through present time to the importance of mothers and women and children, and how of all of the um, folks on the planet, it is the women and the children who are being least um, elevated at this time. I mean, we're working toward it, and we're getting better, and we're telling our stories, etc. But that is the journey right now, focusing on women and children in order to make a better world. Um, there is an of the um, disparity or the juxtaposition of the the field slave and the house slave, and the complexion, the spectrum of our complexion, and the those who resist and those who say, you know, what some folks used to call Uncle Tom. And you can still bring that all the way forward, but there is, like Oceana says, that level of resistance. We still see this in our lives. We saw it throughout the films, some I mentioned, and others, and we now see it even in the words that we use to describe in our stories. But we are resisting it. We are resisting it. Without a doubt, it's important to go back. It's so important to go back and connect what's happening today with what's happened in the past. Those of us who are resisting all of the craziness that's going on right now relative to banning books, etc., as well as what happened in 2020 and the many, many, many years prior to that. It's important for us to know what happened. It's important for that young child, that 11-year-old standing in the street with their fist in the air, you know, shouting for equity and justice, to know that they're standing on the shoulders of centuries of folks who have gone through this fight against trauma, in the vein of resistance and the reclamation of humanity, womanhood, manhood, etc. So we've had different stories, different images, but the constant is the story, right? The constant is that there is this story. And in Sankofa, as filmmakers, we have the opportunity to tell the story with many mediums: the image, the sound, as well as the words. And I think that Sankofa uses, even in the opening scenes with the layers of the music, you have the talking drum, and then you have Aretha Franklin, or, Precious Lord, right next to each other. So that's the same story. It's the same story. So it's important to go back. It's important to commingle. It's important to know that the resistance and the struggle and the trauma that we are dealing with right now is something that has been going on for centuries, and that our work now makes a difference for the work of our children in the future. Because some folks talk about the civil rights movement in decades. I talk about it in centuries, because it's just been going on that long. And the work we do now just has to be the ground and the shoulders for the behind us.
So
So
you mentioned something that I would love for Oceana to sort of contribute to. You mentioned sort of the symbolism of the talking drum, also known as the heartbeat of Africa. So Oceana, I'd love, since you're really a dancer, you're a performer, you're a choreographer, but you're also an artist. So how would you describe the significance of the drum within the film, but also in this narrative of telling a story that, to Dr. Muhammad's point, has lasted centuries?
Yes, we have to do all the things and have all the hats. But so in regard to the film, it was interesting and I shouldn't even say interesting. The storytelling format is this circular format. So you don't know where the story kind of begins or it ends. And is she really going back because she ends up naked? So I don't know where. And I think the vehicle for that transportation from the present to the past was this drum that was talking back and forth. And that's what they did. So the drum and the technique for playing it was developed to communicate and to mimic the sounds of speech patterns, right? And so we see in the drum the guardian of Elmina, the dungeon. I refuse to call it a castle, but the guardian who's there as this kind of Eshu character that's taking the people back, right? For modern day, and we all know the narrative of the drum being banned on plantations, and that happened in America. It happened in the Caribbean. It was one of those things that that was tried to strip away from us, and that was stripped away from us to limit the control, or to maximize the control and limit the communication. And so traditionally, yes, that's what happened. I think in the film, though, like I said before, that the significance is that thing, that material thing, was used to take us and be able to transport us back and bring us back to the present. The actual physical drum, but also the rhythms, but also maybe let's call it a futuring. All right, so we were able to future ourselves carried through these kind of sonic sound waves, these sonic waves created by this African thing that has existed for millennia. I think that answers your question.
It does, and I think it brings me to this point that I love Damani to sort of speak to, is that storytelling, whether it's through orality in the use or tradition of griots, or to your point, Oceana, the use of drums, is really important and impactful way to share individual but also community narrative. So if we root this conversation in the tradition of griots, what role does sharing stories have within society, but also in your own work?
I mean, I love this question. I'd love to just kind of piggyback on, this thinking of the film and its tradition of storytelling, and how each one of these frames is, as you're speaking, James, I was literally thinking of the sound that a projector makes, a sound that, each frame has a cadence. And this film feels symphonic in that way. And also it's shot in such extreme close-up to make choices where you are creating a level of intimacy in what you're seeing. I do remember that being so new, to actually see myself in that, to see people who look like me, look like my family, in such extreme close-up, even to make that decision to engage the viewer in such a textural and tangible way. I think is also part of the tradition, part of the evolution of the tradition when you bring film into it, because for so many years, we're over here, it's pull back and see the wide and just see figures passing through. But in Sankofa, you are living in the moment. So I know that's not the answer to your question, but I just got inspired by listening to, thinking about how the sonic experience and what happens when texture meets. So I'll pass it on.
Can I just add one thing? And those close-ups, what makes it so interesting is that there's no dialogue. The dialogue is internal, and you have to sit there and pay attention to this face that, for the most part, has a neutral countenance. So you get from the story the emotion, and the audience, the viewer, can assign what he or she brings, or whatever they bring to the movie, the close-ups as well as that silence during those close-ups. Very telling.
I too wanted to add something quickly. What I appreciated also sonically was the accents of the different characters. So we had I keep saying Mutabaruka, but I know it, Shango, Shango character, or the American character, or the West African Akan character. We were able to hear those different African cadences throughout the diaspora. And I think that was important because sometimes, I've come across students, I've come across adults who forget that enslavement and colonialism happened really all over. And so we're going to sound differently. There are millions of people who were enslaved that speak Spanish. There are millions of people who were enslaved that speak Portuguese. English and American English is not the only manifestation verbally, or American language, the Black vernacular that developed here in this country is not the only thing that developed out of colonialism, because this was not the only place. And I think that this film brilliantly brings that into the foreground, really, not even the background, the foreground. And so you kind of have to force your ear to understand what Shango was saying when he gets into his Jamaican twang, without any kind of apology, that he brilliantly does. And again, and I really haven't thought about it much until this conversation, how really this movie plays sonically to the viewer. It's quite brilliant, actually.
And that's a level of resistance, that language, because that's one of the things, it took our names, branded us, took our skin, all of the other things that we know. But the ability to speak, whether through the drum or with some type of dialect, was an act of resistance. And the director and the actors were keeping in, as you said, Ms. James, staying in that vernacular. So you had to listen. If you want to know what was going on, you had to listen, So that was a part of the resistance, I think, too.
So all of you, especially as artists and as educators, deal with resistance. So I'd love to start with you, Dr. Muhammad, and understanding how present day, right, where we are in the world today, how can we pick up on themes of resistance in our own work, but also in our community, since you do so much work with activism?
I was having a conversation today about that. I know in the past, I did some work with folks. It's now called DEI. Back in the day, it was, diversity education, multicultural education, and it was other things, and even before then, and was to provide extensions of comfort, to extend bridges and ways for people to connect and come in and to learn. And the tenor now is not exactly the same. The tenor now is, I am here. This is my skin. This is my hair. This is my voice. This is my story. And you need to engage with me. You need to do what you have to do to engage with me. If you think of what Naomi Osaka did, the tennis star, I think when she had some of the names on it or her hat or whatever of the folks who had been killed by police brutality, a reporter asked her what it meant to her. And she turned it around and said, well, what does it mean to you? Why are you asking me that question? You need to figure out why I have this name on my hat. So I think that that's a different level of the type of education and that we need to work toward and find a balance. You find a balance, but there has been a distinct shift, I believe, from us explaining and helping you understand to this is where we are. Please come, welcome, but come and find out. So it's just a different flip of the coin, and I think that that's a shift and a good thing. It's part of the continuum, part of the continuum.
So speaking to that shift, I'd love for you, Ms. James, to sort of talk about your own work, especially with performative art, and thinking about the ways in which that's also a symbol of resistance, no matter what the audience is. So taking away thinking about film, right, but also thinking about the body, right, and how does the body express its own sort of resistance?
Sure. So it's funny because, well, interesting. One show that I wrote, my one woman show, was actually birthed in a class at Sarah Lawrence when I was in my MFA program, and I remember. So backtrack. The show, I was in this experimental writing class, and I was having a hard time, kind of like, what does this woman want from me? I don't know what's going on. All right. So fast forward now. Ferguson, Missouri happens, decision comes back, and I hadn't written anything. And this is like the day of, so I get to school, and it really, okay, I might get in trouble for this, but Sarah Lawrence didn't deal with it, right? Here it is, America, Black America at least, is like, what in the heck is going on in this country? And so I get to my theater program, and nobody talked about it, as if you make art in a vacuum, as if these things don't affect us personally, right? And thereby, even if you don't deal with those things specifically in your work, it's going to affect your body, it's going to affect your mind. And so it wasn't dealt with. So anyway, I had this, fast forward again, my paper was due the next day, my play. It was my day to read, my draft. I didn't know what was going on. And I sat down. It's like, okay, I got to come up with something. And I'm crying. I sit down and I start crying and typing and crying and typing and thinking about my own son and crying and typing. And my show was probably written in about under 4 hours, right? And I can tell you, for me, that I still can't perform that piece without crying, me, Oceana, crying. And the actor in me was like, okay, no, I'm supposed to be this separate character, and no, I'm supposed to approach this without and distance myself from this person because that's not me, but it is, right? So those things affects us. And for me, I can't separate it. So talk about resistance. Those things are always going to be in my work because, one, because that's just who I am, and two, I don't know, I just don't know how to do anything else, right? Dr. Muhammad was talking about we just showing up as we are, and we just show up as we are. So fast forward again, I'm showing this piece. I mean, I'm working on it now. I'm like editing and fixing and taking on and putting in. And I remember deciding, you know what? I'm not going to put this in English, like standard American English. I'm just going to write it like we speak on St. Croix. And who gets it, and who doesn't. And I remember, like, because something just wasn't, it just wasn't meshing. It just wasn't coming together. And when I decided to do that, I was like, okay, boom, here it is. And that was such a revelation without even knowing that I needed a revelation, or a lift off my shoulders without even knowing that something was weighing my shoulders down. Like, I'm getting goosebumps even just saying that, because I think it speaks to this larger thing of us as African people, that these things, these traumas, are they're in our blood. You know, epigenetics is a real thing. Trauma is a real thing that doesn't go away. So talk about exercise. How do we exercise those things? But we don't even realize that they're there. And I think that's the problem. Like, we don't even realize the extent that those traumas are in us until there's this moment when you realize, oh, shoot, right? And so, not to say that I think our art needs to be like, we're having this fallout, I need to go to therapy moment on the stage or in front of the camera. But to some extent, I do think that we use these things to undo this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of direct oppression, and then to this oppression that's happening that we don't even realize is still happening.
So one of the things that I can't believe I'm saying this is that we are rapidly running out of time, but I did want to sort of pose this final question to all of you, because I think one of Sankofa's greatest gifts is embracing culture as a means to express your own identity, history, but also experience. So Dr. Muhammad, I'd love to start with you, and then to Damani, and then wrapping up with Oceana. So how do we sort of represent ourselves, right? But then also thinking about the work that we produce to tell these stories that will continue to have these generational, right, effects, in the same way that Sankofa really was a call to action to keep the work going.
Um, I think that it's important for us to get to the point where we can tell our stories without wearing the shawl of the drama and the trauma of our culture, because it will show up, because the stories are our own, and the culture will emanate from what we do. We carry a big responsibility to make sure that our story relative to our story as it relates to history, our story, we do have that responsibility to tell it, because it has been so carefully extricated from the narrative of humankind. It has been so twisted and mangled. And so we do have that responsibility to repair our story, to fill in the gaps, and to make sure that all of the narratives and all of its layers is told. But we also have the need to be free to just be, and to just create art, and to have that art just be. And that being, the resonance of our being, will add to the tapestry of all of the other part of our story. it will be another part of our journey, another reflection of this long story that has been spotted and stained with all kinds of inhumanity. So I think that's important. Make sure we uphold our responsibility, but we must equally try to be free in our expression, because the ability to create art is the closest that you can get to the divine, in my opinion. And isn't that a nice place for us all to be?
Absolutely.
That's what I have to say. I did want to say something else, but I know we don't have much time. I'm gonna say it anyway. Okay, we talked about how it shows up on our body, and in the film, the trauma shows up on the body from the very beginning. In the sculpture, you see marks on the sculpture in the beginning. The branding, the raping, the beating, the all of that. But at the end, Nuna's body is not found. She is released from her body. So there is a trajectory of having that trauma released. It can be released. So that's me.
Damani, I'd love for you to sort of give your feedback or thoughts about sort of this transition from not only think about Sankofa as a film, but also sort of other work and this generational impact of storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, there is a this really powerful opportunity now where there's, I think Dr. Muhammad said it so beautifully, this unapologetic, just being able to exist in the everyday. When I think about the work I'm really excited about, it's the mundane, actually. It's actually giving value to just walking across the street, and the body language, to double dutch, to the speakers that are in the trunk that you hear coming down the street. It's all the details that make up who we are that are connected to the legacy of joy and trauma and survival and resistance that show up in these beautiful ways, these beautiful creative ways. And so for me to as a filmmaker, I always approach that opportunity with the simplicity of the everyday and the mundane. That's just kind of where I would love to see generations continue that, and finding value in that. Because it's so loaded, and I think you don't have to say how loaded it is. It could just be. It's there's one of the things that I know, kind of growing up and really having a passion for film, was taking the camera and filming members of my family for no other reason besides the fact that they exist. And that footage shows up in the films in ways that I couldn't have imagined coming years later. So, even my students now, I teach a variety of classes. I teach every Monday. I have for almost 20 years, taught one class. And this year, I'm teaching a class on visions called Visions of Social Justice. And it's a nonfiction filmmaking course where students are asked to partner with local organizations to help produce content for them. So, I know the president's probably watching this, but this is like my subversive way of getting in to higher education that has been has been exclusive and lack diversity, and also treating the classroom as a place for everyone to arrive to that place, regardless of your own story and background, where you can see the humanity in someone else. And so by picking up a camera and building a relationship with someone in Yonkers or in the Bronx or downtown, you are then a participant in a larger narrative that I think has been shifting, and in an unapologetic way, where you do not have to explain why you're here. You get to just be, and to capture that in those frames is the vision. It's the future I hope to be a part of.
Absolutely. And Oceana, I think that you sort of present us with a perfect way to wrap the panel, since you are a fairly recent graduate of Sarah Lawrence, but also representing a new generation of artists, but also performers. And how do you see sort of the future of what you're going to contribute for a long, long time? into the future?
Sorry. Hard question. I think so. Two things. When Dr. Muhammad was talking about in the body, I remember specifically a line that Nunu says that it's only this flesh that's holding us here on this earth, and that's something that I think about. And I was when I was rewatching this film in preparation for this, I was like, oh yes, it really is. So how do we? And then again, what Damani, Mr. Baker was saying too about the mundane. And I think that's also where I want to be, like these things where we just are, right? We don't have to explain it. We're just, this is just who we are. This is our story. It doesn't have to be rooted in the slave narrative. Like I remember when I saw, talk about modern or filmmakers that are making things now, when I saw The Burial of Kojo, I was blown away. It's just a beautiful, beautiful movie. And how many times do Black filmmakers just get to make a beautiful movie without this thing of we have to tell this slave story? And yes, that is our story and that is our narrative and it's in us and we're only here because we survived, but it's not the only story that makes us. It is not the only legacy that we have. It's not the only thing that we have to say. And for me, that is what I would like to carry forward. How can I, this daughter that comes from Africa to St. Croix, that's where my people are from St. Croix, for hundreds of years. So how do I tell that story in a way that gives honor to those people, to those women, to the men who had the audacity to live and survive, who had the audacity to take the scraps of food and say, I'm going to make the most delicious thing that I can out of this food because this is what I have, that I'm going to find those moments of joy. Another favorite line in the movie was when Nunu was rapping Noble Ali, and she said, well, you're going to learn how to be a tender man, right? So how do we tell these stories of what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman that is outside of this slave narrative, that we're just reconnecting to our humanity, the humanity that we taught the world. African people taught the world humanity. So how do we jump back to that? And that's where I would like, that's my goal as an artist.
And I can't think of a better way to end this discussion than to sort of call to action to think about humanity and the ways in which all of us, whether we're filmmakers, educators like myself, or activists or everyday people can contribute to the humanity, and realizing that there's a number of societal issues, but all of us can contribute to that effort. So thank you all for joining us this evening to screen and discuss the film Sankofa. This event is part of a series that engages different generations and approaches to injustice and also the possibilities to the future. While this initial conversation focused on descendants of the African diaspora, future events, will provide an opportunity to discover how other groups, communities, and populations tell their stories. So a special thanks to our panelists, our event team, Anna Ray, and all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing our next event and have a great night.